Zara stood perfectly still in the middle of Jake's workshop area, staring at his equipment with an expression that Jake had never seen on her face before. Her silver eyes moved from tool to tool, taking in every detail of his modifications and custom builds. She looked like someone who had just discovered that everything they thought they knew about the world was wrong. "These frequency ranges," she said slowly, pointing at the display on his spectrum analyzer. "This level of precision for modified human technology should not be possible." "But it is possible," Jake said. "It just took some creative thinking and a lot of experimentation." Zara picked up another of his tools, a micro-calibration device that he had built from scratch using components from 6 different manufacturers. She examined it with the same intense focus she usually reserved for her Veltharian textbooks. "You created this entire device yourself?" "Yeah. I needed something that could measure tolerances down to the submolecular level for a project I was working on, but nothing like that existed in the price range I could afford, so I figured out how to build one." "Submolecular tolerances!" Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our people use similar devices, but they cost more than most individuals earn in a lifetime. Mine probably cost me about 2 weeks' salary in parts, plus a few months of evenings and weekends to build and calibrate." Zara set down the device and looked at Jake directly. "Your entire species approaches engineering this way? Building and modifying equipment to exceed its original specifications?" "A lot of us do, yeah. When you can't afford the best tool for the job, you figure out how to make a cheaper tool work better. When the tool you need doesn't exist, you build it yourself." "This is not primitive engineering," Zara said quietly. "This is something else entirely." Jake felt a strange mix of pride and vindication. For weeks, Zara had dismissed human technology as crude and inefficient. Now she was standing in his workshop, looking at his equipment like it was some kind of revelation. "The crystal parameters," he reminded her gently, "if you want me to try to fix it." Zara nodded and began providing him with the technical specifications for her consciousness alignment crystal. The information was complex, involving frequency patterns that shifted across multiple dimensions and harmonic relationships that Jake didn't fully understand. But the basic principles were similar to things he had worked with before, just operating at frequencies and precision levels that required more sophisticated equipment than most humans had access to. As Zara explained the crystal's function, Jake began setting up his analysis equipment. He connected the spectrum analyzer to his frequency generator and calibrated both devices to operate in the ranges that Veltharian technology used. The process required several jury-rig connections and some creative improvisation, but eventually, he had a system that could examine the crystal's internal structure and identify the specific frequency patterns that had been disrupted. "This is remarkable," Zara said as she watched him work. "You are creating a functional harmonic analysis system from equipment that was never designed for this purpose." "That's kind of the point," Jake said as he made final adjustments to his setup. "Human engineering isn't about having the perfect tool for every job. It's about making whatever tools you have work for whatever job you need to do." He placed Zara's crystal in the analysis chamber he had improvised and began scanning its internal structure. The results appeared on multiple displays, showing the complex 3-dimensional matrix inside the crystal and the extensive damage that had been caused by prolonged exposure to incompatible electromagnetic fields. "The damage is worse than I thought," Jake said, studying the readouts. "The entire resonance chamber network has been destabilized, but I think I can see what needs to be done." The problem was that the crystal's internal matrix had been designed to resonate at very specific frequencies, and the interference from human technology had gradually shifted those frequencies until the entire system collapsed. To repair it, Jake would need to identify the original frequency patterns and then find a way to restore them. "This will take some time," he told Zara. "I need to map the entire internal structure and figure out how to recalibrate the resonance chambers. Are you okay to wait a few hours?" Zara looked at him with an expression that might have been hope mixed with disbelief. You believe you can actually repair it. I think so. It won't be a perfect fix, and it probably won't last as long as a proper Veltharian repair would. But it should work well enough to get you through until you can get help from your people. A. Temporary solution implemented quickly rather than waiting for the optimal approach, Zara said thoughtfully. Exactly. Jake worked for the next 3 hours, mapping the crystal's internal structure and identifying the frequency patterns that needed to be restored. The work required using all of his modified equipment simultaneously, creating a complex web of connections and calibrations that probably violate every safety protocol in the engineering manual. But gradually, he began to understand how the crystal was supposed to function and what needed to be done to fix it. The actual repair process involved using his micro-welders to carefully reconstruct damaged resonance chambers while simultaneously using his frequency generators to restore the proper harmonic patterns. It was delicate work that required steady hands and precise timing, and Jake found himself completely absorbed in the challenge. Zara watched the entire process with fascination. She asked questions about his techniques and seemed genuinely interested in understanding how he was approaching the problem. For the first time since they had started living together, she was treating his methods as something worth learning about rather than something to be dismissed. Your approach is completely different from how my people would handle this repair, she observed, as Jake worked on recalibrating a particularly complex resonance chamber. How would your people do it? We would analyze the damage using mathematical models to determine the optimal repair sequence, then implement that sequence using precision tools designed specifically for crystal matrix reconstruction. That sounds more efficient than what I'm doing. Perhaps. But your approach allows for real-time adaptation as new problems are discovered. When you encountered the secondary resonance cascade that our models would not have predicted, you simply modify your technique to address it. Jake paused in his work and looked at her. You're saying my way worked better? I am saying your way worked when the theoretically superior approach would have failed because it could not account for unexpected variables. By late afternoon, Jake had successfully restored most of the crystal's internal matrix. The resonance chambers were functioning again, though not at the same level of precision as they had originally. The frequency patterns were stable, but would probably drift over time and eventually need more permanent repair. I think that's the best I can do with the equipment I have, Jake said, as he carefully removed the crystal from his analysis chamber. It should work for basic meditation, but you'll want to get it properly fixed as soon as you can. Zara took the crystal in her hands, and immediately her posture changed. The tension that had been building in her movements over the past day began to fade, and her silver eyes regained some of their usual focus. It is working, she said with obvious relief. The harmonic resonance is restored. Not perfect, but functional. How do you feel? Much better? The mental distress is already beginning to subside. Zara looked at Jake with an expression he had never seen before. You have done something that should have been impossible with human technology. I just did what needed to be done. No, Zara said firmly. You did something far more significant than that. You took equipment that was never designed for this purpose and made it work anyway. You adapted to unexpected problems in real time. You saw the problem that our theoretical models said could not be solved with your available resources. Jake started putting away his tools, feeling oddly embarrassed by Zara's praise. It's just basic problem solving. It is not basic at all, Zara said. It is something my people have forgotten how to do. Jake turned the crystal over in his hands, feeling its weight and texture. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and the surface had a strange quality that made it feel both smooth and textured at the same time. The cracks running through it were definitely stress fractures, but they were more complex than anything he had seen in metal or ceramic materials. They seemed to follow the internal structure of the crystal in a way that suggested the damage was caused by something that interfered with whatever energy the crystal was supposed to conduct. Tell me how this thing works, Jake said, still examining the crystal carefully. I mean, I know it's for meditation, but what actually happens when you use it? Zara watched him handle the crystal with obvious nervousness, but she seemed willing to explain. The crystal resonates at specific frequencies that match the natural harmonic patterns of Veltharian brain activity. When I hold it during meditation, it amplifies and stabilizes my mental processes, allowing for deeper consciousness alignment. So it's like a tuning fork for your brain? That is a very crude comparison, but not entirely inaccurate. The crystal maintains precise frequency relationships that promote optimal neurological function. Jake held the crystal up to his ear and shook it gently. You could hear something moving inside, like small pieces of broken material. There are definitely fragments loose in there. Whatever happened, it broke something internal, not just the surface. The internal matrix must have collapsed, Zara said, her voice full of worry. If the harmonic resonance chambers are damaged, the crystal cannot function properly. Such damage is usually irreversible without complete reconstruction. What would cause that kind of damage? Exposure to incompatible frequency patterns, physical shock, or Zara paused and looked embarrassed. Or prolonged exposure to chaotic energy fields. Jake raised an eyebrow. Chaotic energy fields? The kind that might be generated by primitive electrical systems that lack proper harmonic shielding, Zara said quietly. You mean like human technology? I did not say that. But that's what you meant. Jake set the crystal down on the table and looked at Zara. Your meditation crystal got broken because you've been living around human equipment for 3 weeks. Zara's crystalline skin seemed to darken slightly, which Jake was learning was the Veltharian equivalent of blushing. It is possible that the unshielded electromagnetic emissions from various human devices in our quarters have gradually destabilized the crystal's internal matrix. So our primitive technology broke your advanced technology just by existing in the same space. The situation is more complex than that simple description suggests. Jake almost smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. But basically, yes, Zara admitted. Jake picked up the crystal again and continued his examination. The internal damage was definitely caused by frequency interference, which meant the problem might be fixable if he could figure out how to restore the proper resonance patterns. It would require understanding how the crystal was supposed to work and then finding a way to repair or replace the damaged internal components. Do you have any technical specifications for this thing? Blueprints or frequency charts or anything like that? Such information exists, but it is considered sacred knowledge among my people. It is not shared with outsiders. Even if the outsider is trying to help fix it? Zara was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with something. I could provide basic functional parameters without revealing construction details. But even if you understood how the crystal should operate, human technology lacks the precision necessary to repair harmonic resonance chambers. Maybe, Jake sighed, but maybe not. Mind if I try? Try what? Exactly? I don't know yet. Let me think about it overnight. Maybe I can come up with something. That night, Jake lay in his bed thinking about frequency patterns and harmonic resonance. He didn't know much about consciousness alignment or Veltharian neurology, but he knew plenty about frequency interference and resonance chambers. The principle was the same, whether you were talking about meditation crystals or communication, equipment or musical instruments. Something was supposed to vibrate at a specific frequency, and that vibration had been disrupted by interference from incompatible sources. The next morning, Jake found Zara in the main room looking worse than he had ever seen her. Her usual graceful movements seemed jerky and uncoordinated, and her silver eyes had lost their usual sharp focus. She was holding the broken crystal and staring at it with an expression of desperation. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked. "Poorly. The mental distress is increasing. I am finding it difficult to concentrate or maintain emotional stability." Her musical voice sounded strained and off-key. "I fear I may need to request emergency medical assistance soon. Before you do that, let me try something. I have an idea, but I'll need to use some of my tools. They're in my room. Your tools? Yeah, I brought some of my personal equipment from Earth, stuff I use for precision work and hobby projects. It might not be as advanced as Veltharian technology, but it might be good enough for a temporary fix. Zara looked skeptical, but she was clearly desperate enough to consider any option. What kind of tools do you possess that could possibly address harmonic resonance disruption? You'd be surprised what humans can do when we need to. Give me a few hours to set up, and then I'll show you. Jake went to his room and pulled out a storage case he had kept hidden under his bed. Inside were tools and equipment that most people would never need in their daily lives, but that Jake considered essential for the kind of precision work he enjoyed doing in his spare time. He had micro-welders, frequency generators, spectrum analyzers, and a dozen other instruments that he had either built himself or modified far beyond their original specifications. He spent the morning setting up a workspace in the corner of his room behind a folding partition that he positioned to give him privacy while he worked. The equipment required careful calibration and several jury-rig connections to work together, but eventually he had a functioning analysis and repair station that could examine the crystal's internal structure and potentially reconstruct its frequency patterns. I'm ready, he called to Zara, but I need you to give me those basic functional parameters you mentioned. Zara came to his room and stopped in the doorway when she saw his setup. Her eyes went wide, and she stared at the array of equipment with an expression Jake couldn't interpret. What is all this? She asked quietly. Tools. Equipment for precision work. I know it doesn't look like much compared to what you're used to, but it should be enough to analyze your crystal and maybe figure out how to fix it. Zara stepped closer and began examining his equipment more carefully. She picked up one of his modified micro-welders and turned it over in her hands, studying the custom modifications he had made to increase its precision and extend its frequency range. You built this yourself, she said. It wasn't a question. Most of it, yeah. Some pieces I bought and then modified to work better for what I needed. Zara set down the micro-welder and picked up his spectrum analyzer, which he had rebuilt from 3 different commercial units to create something that could measure frequencies far outside the normal human range. She examined the modifications with increasing intensity, and Jake could see her silver eyes tracking over every detail of his work. This device should not be capable of these measurements, she said finally. The base technology lacks the necessary precision, not in its original configuration, no. But if you modify the input filters and add some custom amplification circuits, you can extend the range significantly. Show me. Jake activated the spectrum analyzer and demonstrated its expanded capabilities, including frequency measurements that approached the range that Veltharian technology typically operated in. Zara watched with growing amazement as he showed her tool after tool that had been enhanced beyond its original design limitations. How did you know to make these modifications? She asked. Trial and error, mostly, and a lot of reading technical manuals for equipment I couldn't afford to buy. Jake picked up the broken crystal. Now, about those functional parameters you promised me. 3 weeks into their shared living arrangement, Jake had settled into a routine that mostly involved avoiding Zara during her meditation times and trying not to react when she made comments about human inefficiency. He had started eating breakfast earlier so he wouldn't have to watch her look disgusted at his cooking, and he had learned to recognize the warning signs that she was about to launch into an explanation of why Veltharian methods were superior to whatever he was doing. On this particular morning, Jake was running late for his shift because the sonic shower in their shared bathroom had malfunctioned, and he had spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to make it work for human physiology instead of the 3-armed Grixian body type it seemed to be stuck on. By the time he got dressed and grabbed his toolkit, Zara had already left for her classes at the station's university section. Jake's workday started with a crisis in Docking Bay 7, where a Martian cargo ship had experienced a power coupling. failure that left it stuck halfway through the docking procedure. The ship was too big to back out manually and too heavy for the docking bay's emergency systems to pull in completely. Jake and his team spent 4 hours crawling through maintenance tunnels and access shafts, rerouting power and manually overriding safety systems to get the ship properly docked. "Nice work today," Chief Kim told him as they finished the paperwork. On the repair, the Martians were impressed that we got them docked without having to call for a tug ship from the main fleet. "Just took some creative rewiring," Jake said, wiping lubricant off his hands with a cleaning cloth. "Nothing fancy." Maybe not fancy, but it worked. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. Jake left work feeling good about the day, which made coming home to Zara's latest criticism of human engineering practices even more annoying than usual. He found her in the main room, reading from her floating book display, with what looked like homework assignments projected in the air around her. "How was your study of primitive engineering methods today?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Fascinating from an anthropological perspective," Zara replied without looking up. "Your people's approach to problem solving appears to be entirely based on trial and error rather than mathematical analysis. Today I observed a human engineer attempting to repair a gravity generator by hitting it with a metal tool until it functioned correctly. Did it work? Eventually, yes. But the approach required 17 different attempts and resulted in temporary damage to 3 secondary systems. But it worked. Yes, through pure chance and persistence rather than understanding." Zara finally looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the light from her book display. "Your species seems to believe that if you apply enough force and attempt enough variations, any problem can be solved." Jake sat down in the chair across from her and tried not to let his irritation show. Sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. Sometimes the fancy mathematical approach takes too long or doesn't account for real-world conditions. Or sometimes your species simply lacks the mathematical sophistication to identify optimal solutions. The comment hit harder than usual, maybe because Jake was tired from the long day, or maybe because he was getting sick of having his entire species dismissed as backwards. "You know what, Zara? Maybe we don't have your fancy math, but we get things done. We solve problems that matter. We don't sit around calculating the perfect solution while people are stuck in broken ships or living with broken systems." Zara set down her book completely and gave him her full attention. "You believe that speed of implementation is more important than elegance of solution. I believe that a solution that works today is better than a perfect solution that takes a week to figure out, even if the quick solution creates additional problems that must be solved later. Even then, sometimes, because at least people aren't suffering while you're thinking about it." They stared at each other for a moment, and Jake realized this was probably the most honest conversation they had ever had. Zara looked like she was trying to process something that didn't fit into her understanding of how things should work. "I must consider this perspective," she said finally. "It had not occurred to me that suboptimal solutions might have value in time-critical situations." The next morning started the same as always, with Zara's meditation humming and Jake's attempt to cook breakfast without burning it. But something was different in the way they moved around each other in the shared space. There was less tension, like they had finally said something that needed to be said. Jake was getting ready to leave for work when Zara emerged from her room looking agitated. She was carrying what looked like a crystal about the size of a baseball, and even Jake could see that something was wrong with it. The crystal, which usually glowed with a soft blue light, was flickering and had dark spots running through it like cracks. "Is that your meditation thing?" Jake asked. "My consciousness alignment crystal," Zara said, her musical voice tight with worry. "It appears to have suffered some form of harmonic disruption. Without it, I cannot maintain proper mental balance." "Can you fix it?" "I do not know. The repair techniques for harmonic crystals require specialized tools and knowledge that I do not possess. I will need to contact my homeworld for guidance, but the communication delay is 14 standard days." Jake looked at the crystal more closely. The cracks seemed to follow a pattern, like stress fractures in metal when it had been subjected to vibration at the wrong frequency. What happens if you can't fix it? Extended periods without proper consciousness alignment can lead to severe mental distress for my people. Anxiety, confusion, inability to focus. In extreme cases, complete psychological breakdown. That sounds serious. Do you have backup crystals or anything? No. Each crystal is individually tuned to its owner's specific neurological patterns. They cannot be shared or replaced easily. Jake watched Zara turn the crystal over in her hands, and he could see real fear in her silver eyes. For all her talk about superior Veltharian technology, she was stuck with a broken piece of equipment that she couldn't fix, facing 2 weeks of mental distress while she waited for help from home. "I have to go to work," Jake said. "But maybe I can ask around, see if anyone on the station knows anything about crystal repair." "Thank you," Zara said quietly. "That is kind of you." Jake left for work with the image of Zara's worried face stuck in his mind. He had never seen her look uncertain before, and it made him realize that for all her confidence about Veltharian superiority, she was just as far from home and just as vulnerable as he was at work. He asked Chief Kim and the other engineers if anyone knew anything about consciousness alignment crystals, but nobody had any useful suggestions. The station had a few Veltharian visitors, but none of them were technical specialists, and the station's alien technology experts were all focused on things like life support systems and navigation equipment. "Sounds like your roommate is in a tough spot," Lisa said during their lunch break. "Too bad there's not some way to jury-rig a temporary fix until she can get proper help." Jake spent the rest of his shift thinking about that. Jury-rigging temporary fixes was exactly the kind of thing humans were good at, the kind of thing Zara always criticized as primitive and inefficient. But if her own people's sophisticated approach meant waiting 2 weeks for a solution while she suffered psychological breakdown, maybe primitive and inefficient was better than nothing. When Jake got home that evening, he found Zara sitting in the dark main room staring out at the stars. The broken crystal was on the table in front of her, and she looked like she had been crying, though he wasn't sure if Veltharians cried the same way humans did. "Any luck with the crystal?" he asked. "No. I have sent a message to Velthara, but the response will not arrive for many days. I fear I may not be able to maintain mental stability until then." Jake sat down across from her and looked at the crystal. In the dim light from the window, he could see the stress fractures more clearly. They really did look like the kind of damage he had seen in machinery that had been subjected to the wrong frequency vibrations. "Would you mind if I took a look at it?" he asked. "I know it's not my area, but maybe I can figure out what caused the damage." Zara looked at him with surprise. "You wish to examine Veltharian consciousness alignment technology?" "I wish to help my roommate who's in trouble," Jake said simply. For a long moment, Zara just stared at him. Then she carefully picked up the crystal and placed it in his hands. "Please be very careful. If it is damaged further, the consequences could be severe." Jake held the crystal up to the light and began to examine it closely, looking for clues about what had gone wrong and whether there might be some way to fix it. The first week living with Zara felt like the longest week of Jake's life. Every morning started the same way. He would wake up to strange humming sounds coming from her room as she did what she called her morning alignment ritual. The sounds were not unpleasant, but they were definitely not human, and they reminded him constantly that he was sharing his living space with someone from another world. Zara's daily routine was precise in a way that made Jake feel chaotic by comparison. She would emerge from her room at exactly the same time each day, already dressed in what looked like flowing fabric that changed colors depending on how the light hit it. She would prepare her morning nutrition synthesis, which involved using a device that looked like a small silver pyramid to create what appeared to be glowing liquid in a crystal container. The whole process took exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Jake had started timing it without meaning to. Meanwhile, Jake's morning routine involved stumbling to the kitchen area, looking for coffee packets and usually burning whatever breakfast. He tried to cook on the multi-species heating unit that seemed designed for everything except normal human food. The smell of his burned eggs or overcooked protein bars seemed to physically pain Zara, who would wrinkle her nose in what he assumed was the Veltharian equivalent of disgust. "Your species consumes damaged organic matter intentionally," she observed. On the third morning, as Jake scraped blackened remnants of his breakfast into the waste disposal, "This seems counterproductive to maintaining optimal biological function." "It's not damaged, it's cooked," Jake replied, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "Humans have been cooking food for thousands of years. It helps break down proteins and kills harmful bacteria. Bacteria that would not exist if you synthesize your nutrients properly in the first place," Zara said as she sipped her glowing liquid. "Your approach is to create a problem and then solve it with more problems." Jake had no good answer for that, so he just grabbed a nutrition bar that didn't require heating and headed off to his job in the station's engineering section. Working with Chief Engineer Lisa Kim and the rest of the human crew was a relief after spending the morning with Zara's casual superiority. "How's life with the Crystal Princess?" Lisa asked as they reviewed the daily maintenance reports for the station's docking bays. Lisa was a small woman with graying hair and hands that were always stained with lubricant or coolant from whatever system she had been working on. She had been Jake's supervisor for 2 years before they both got assigned the Harmony Point, and she knew him well enough to see when something was bothering him. "She thinks everything we do is primitive," Jake said as he ran diagnostics on a cargo bay door that had been sticking. "Yesterday, she watched me fix a loose panel with a standard wrench, and I swear she looked like she was watching someone try to perform surgery with a rock. Let me guess, she's got some fancy tool that would have done the job in half the time with no effort." "Probably, but she didn't offer to help. She just stood there looking like she was studying some kind of ancient ritual." Jake found the problem with the door mechanism and started working on the sticky joint. "I don't think she's trying to be mean about it. It's more like she genuinely can't understand why we don't just do everything the way her people do it. Maybe that's the point of this whole exchange program," Lisa said. "Maybe they need to understand that there's more than one way to solve a problem." That evening, Jake tried to approach things differently with Zara. Instead of getting defensive about human methods, he decided to ask her about Veltharian technology. Maybe if he showed interest in her way of doing things, she might be more open to understanding his. "That device you use to make your food," he said as they sat in the main room after dinner. "How does it work?" Zara looked up from what appeared to be a 3-dimensional book that projected text and images in the air above her hands. "It analyzes my current biological state and synthesizes the precise molecular combinations my body requires at this moment. The process is quite simple. Could it make human food? Like actual food that tastes like something? It could replicate the molecular structure of any organic compound," she said. "But why would you want it to taste like something specific?" "Taste preferences are emotional responses that interfere with optimal nutrition." Jake stared at her. "You don't eat anything because you enjoy it? Ever? Enjoyment of consumption is a primitive response that served evolutionary purposes when species had to compete for limited resources. Advanced civilizations move beyond such basic drives. So you never eat anything just because it tastes good?" Zara paused her reading and looked at him with what might have been curiosity. "Your species continues to make decisions based on pleasure. Responses even when you know more efficient alternatives exist." "Well, yeah. Food isn't just about nutrition. It's about culture and memories and sharing experiences with other people. My grandmother made these empanadas that probably weren't perfectly nutritionally balanced. But every time I eat one now, I think about her kitchen and how safe I felt there when I was a kid." You form emotional attachments to suboptimal resource. Consumption? Jake realized that trying to explain the emotional significance of food to Zara was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. "Never mind. It's hard to explain." But Zara surprised him by setting down her book completely. No, please continue. This emotional attachment to inefficient processes is something I am here to study. How does the memory of your grandmother's food preparation affect your current decision-making? For the next hour, Jake found himself talking about his family, his childhood, and how human culture was tied up in things that probably seemed completely irrational to a species that had optimized away all inefficiency. Zara listened with intense focus, occasionally asking questions that showed she was trying to understand, but clearly found the whole concept alien. Your species maintains these traditional practices even when you know they are suboptimal, she said finally. This suggests that efficiency is not your primary value. I guess not, Jake admitted. We care about efficiency, but we also care about other things. Connection, tradition, the way things make us feel. This explains much about human engineering approaches, Zara said thoughtfully. Your designs prioritize multiple competing values simultaneously, which creates what appears to be inefficiency, but may serve social and emotional functions we have not considered. Jake felt like this was the first real conversation they had managed to have. What about your people? Do you have any traditions or things you do just because they matter to you personally? Zara was quiet for a long moment. We have meditation practices that are not strictly necessary for biological function. They serve what you might call spiritual purposes, though we would describe them as consciousness alignment activities. Like the humming I hear in the mornings? Yes, it helps me maintain connection to the harmonic frequencies that my people consider essential for mental health. I suppose it could be described as a tradition, though we would say it is based on measurable neurological benefits. But you do it because it makes you feel better, right? Not just because it's efficient. Zara considered this. Perhaps. I had not thought of it in those terms before. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both looking out the large window at the stars. Jake felt like they had made some small progress toward understanding each other, even if Zara still thought most human practices were backward and inefficient. The feeling lasted until the next morning when Jake tried to fix a malfunctioning environmental control unit in their quarters, using what he thought was a perfectly reasonable approach with basic tools. Zara watched him work for 10 minutes before shaking her head and walking away, muttering something in her own language that he was pretty sure translated to something like foolish primitive methods. Jake Martinez stood outside the metal door of his new home for the next 6 months and took a deep breath. The air recyclers on Harmony Point always made everything smell like clean metal and something that reminded him of rain back on Earth. He looked at the small screen beside the door that showed his assignment details one more time. Room 847C shared quarters. Roommate, Zara of Velthera Prime. Species, Veltharian. The words made his stomach feel tight with worry. He had never lived with an alien before. Back on Earth, he lived alone in a small apartment near the shipyard, where he worked fixing cargo haulers and transport vessels. His friends always said he was better with machines than people anyway. Now here he was on the biggest space station in known space, about to share a living space with someone from a completely different world. Jake pressed his thumb to the door scanner and heard the soft beep that meant it recognized him. The door slid open with a quiet whoosh. The quarters were bigger than he expected, but still felt cramped. There was a main living area with 2 small bedrooms on opposite sides, a tiny kitchen unit, and what looked like a bathroom that had been designed to work for different alien body types. His roommate was already there. Zara stood near the large window that looked out into space, and Jake had to stop himself from staring. She was taller than him by at least a foot, with skin that looked like it was made of pale blue crystal that caught the light from the window. She had 4 arms instead of 2, and her face was more angular than human faces, with large silver eyes that seemed to reflect light like mirrors. Her hair was white and moved like it was floating in water even though there was normal gravity. In the room, she turned when she heard the door open and looked at Jake with what he thought might be curiosity. When she spoke, Her voice had a musical quality that made it sound like she was almost singing her words. "You must be the human they assigned to share this space with me. I am Zara. I have been told your species prefers to use personal names rather than formal titles." Jake set down his single bag and tried to smile in a way that seemed friendly. "Yeah, I'm Jake. Jake Martinez. Nice to meet you, Zara." He wasn't sure if he should try to shake hands or if Veltharians did that. With 4 arms, maybe they had a completely different greeting. Zara tilted her head slightly and studied him. Jake Martinez. That is a simple name. On Velthura, names carry the history of 7 generations and describe the bearer's expected contribution to society. But I suppose human naming systems are more basic. The way she said basic made Jake feel like she was calling him simple, but he tried not to let it bother him. He had read about Veltharians during the 3-week journey to Harmony Point. They were one of the most technologically advanced species in the known galaxy. Their ships could cross distances that took human vessels months to travel in just days. Their cities were supposed to be marvels of engineering that made Earth's biggest megacities look like small towns. "I claim the bedroom on the left side," Zara continued, gesturing with 2 of her arms toward one of the doors. "I require specific light frequencies for my daily meditation cycles, and that room's window provides the optimal angle for the station's position relative to the local star. I trust this arrangement is acceptable to your species' needs." Jake nodded and picked up his bag. "Sure, that's fine. I don't need anything special." He walked toward the other bedroom and noticed that Zara was watching him carefully. He wondered if all humans looked as strange to her as she looked to him. His room was small but had everything he needed. A bed that looked like it could adjust to different body types, a small desk, and some storage compartments built into the walls. There was also a window, though it looked out at a different part of the station instead of into deep space like the main room. When he came back out, Zara was unpacking items from several containers that looked too advanced to be simple luggage. Everything she pulled out seemed to glow or hum with some kind of energy. She had devices that Jake couldn't even begin to guess the purpose of, and she handled them all with the casual ease of someone who was used to technology that was far beyond anything humans had developed. "Are you here as part of the cultural exchange program too?" Jake asked, trying to start a conversation. "I am here to study what your people call engineering," she replied without looking up from her unpacking. "Though, from what I have observed of human technology during my journey here, I suspect it will be more of an anthropological study than a technical one. Your species seems to favor what we might call brute force solutions over elegant design." Jake felt his face get warm. "We get things done. Maybe our stuff doesn't look as fancy as yours, but it works." Zara finally looked at him, and he could see something that might have been amusement in her silver eyes. "I did not mean to cause offense. It is simply that human engineering appears to rely heavily on trial and error rather than mathematical precision. Your ships, for example, are quite robust, but they achieve their goals through redundancy and over-engineering rather than efficient design." Over-engineering? Jake knew he probably shouldn't argue with his new roommate on the first day, but he couldn't help himself. "Our ships might not be as fast as yours, but they can take damage and keep flying. They're built to last." "Indeed, very much like your species in general, I believe. Resilient, if not sophisticated." Zara turned back to her unpacking, and Jake got the clear impression that she considered the conversation finished. Jake went to the kitchen area and started looking through the cabinets to see what kind of food preparation tools were available. Everything looked standard for a multi-species habitat. There were heating elements that could be adjusted for different atmospheric pressures, storage that could maintain various temperature and humidity levels, and dispensers for both human and non-human nutritional requirements. "Do you actually cook your food?" Zara asked from across the room. "I was told humans still use thermal preparation methods, but I assumed that was exaggerated." "Yeah, we cook." "Don't your people eat regular food?" We synthesize nutrients to match our body's specific requirements at any given moment. The idea of consuming random organic matter that has been heated seems inefficient and potentially dangerous. Jake opened one of his meal packets and started reading the instructions. It tastes better than it sounds, and it's not random. We know what we're doing. Over the next hour, they settled into an awkward routine of sharing the space while trying not to get in each other's way. Zara's belongings were clearly more advanced than anything Jake had brought with him, and she seemed to take it for granted that her way of doing things was superior. When she activated what looked like a personal environment control system that made the air around her sleeping area shimmer slightly, Jake realized he was going to be living with technology he could barely comprehend. That evening, as they sat in the main room eating their respective meals, Jake tried to make conversation again. "So, what do you think of the station so far?" "It is adequately constructed for a multi-species habitat," Zara replied. "Though I notice much of the human design sections show the same tendency toward overbuilding that I mentioned earlier. Your people seem to believe that making something larger and stronger is equivalent to making it better." Jake looked out the window at the stars and wondered how he was going to survive 6 months of this.